Looking at the need to fix the country's budget in order to meet the yearnings and aspirations of the people and, of course, actualize the goals in terms of development of the country, looking at infrastructures and the rest of it, forms the crux of this discussion as we look at budgeting and wealth creation, challenges and solutions. I have my guests with me in the studio, starting from my immediate left, a political scientist, lecturer at University of Benin, Neville Obakedo. Thanks for joining, Neville.
Good morning, ITV. Thank you, viewers and listeners at home, for this morning's program.
Next is also a lecturer of the AAU, ECOMA, and he is a political economist, social media influencer, Ibrahim Momo. Thanks for coming, Ibrahim.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
We usually enjoy the thoughts that are being expressed from Neville Obakedo as political scientist and, of course, the political economist, Ibrahim Momo, and today won't be different. Let's look at what we've been having as budgets. Surprisingly, the Presidential Committee Chairman Oyedele did much exposition as regards what we call the national budget and how small it is as compared to some African countries like South Africa and Kenya. Put together for this year, for instance, we have the budget about 27.5 trillion naira. And then if we add up the one of the subnational government, I mean from the states, it turns up to 15.9 trillion naira. Put together, we have about 51 trillion naira. And converting the naira to dollars, we have about $32 billion. And surprisingly, this happens to be a budget of Kenya with 44 million population, quite about a quarter of Nigeria's population. How do you see this? Do you see our budget year in, year out as meeting the yearnings of the people and, of course, hitting the mark as regards the goals for which it was, created year in, year out? Neville.
Yeah, thank you for having me this morning once again. When we talk about budgeting and budget, there are two different things. And so we are going to look at the meaning of a budget.
Okay.
A budget is a statement from an organization or a nation state that stipulates or shows the revenue that has been expected for a fiscal year and how the revenue will be expended. That is a budget. But we are talking about budgeting. It is a process and an act, A-R-O-T, deliberate, that an organization or a state need to follow, and it is established. Like in the case of Nigeria, there is a budgeting process. Budgeting process at the federal level, for instance. All ministries, departments, and agencies of government are supposed to submit their budget proposal to the budget office of Mr. President, who will now collate and go and present such a fiscal policy statement to a combination of the National Assembly, both the Senate and the House of Rep, and then they will now set up their different subcommittees to look at that budget before the budget can now be passed into law. In that process, they may add or subtract from what the president has brought before the same thing is applicable to the state, only that the state is a unicameral legislature. The point that need to be made when we are discussing the budgeting and budget in Nigeria is the issue of contributions that are supposed to be made by the people. Experience has shown that people in various ministries and departments, because they know that budgeting is a routine, and at the end of every year, they are expected to submit their budget statement to the relevant offices of government. What they do is that, whether it's incremental or they will just sit down, change some figures. The research they are supposed to do, that are supposed to drive the process of budgeting, they don't do it. And so a man becomes a president, then he will just sit there in the office, they just submit the document, somebody will arrange the document for you, prepare it, and then he will go and deliver it without actually having a good grasp of what the government will be expecting and what the government is going to spend. At the end of the day, you will now see that we now have crisis of budgeting or crisis of budget implementation, where we now be talking of a deficit budget. Ordinarily, every budget of a nation state that knows what she's doing is supposed to be a surplus, aimed at surplus budget, or at most a balanced budget. But what we have discovered in recent years, whether at the sub-national level or at the national level, we are always looking for how to finance our budget, because right from the process of preparation, we already know that the budget is going to witness a deficit. This is the crisis that we are facing. I'm talking about other countries, talking about Nigeria and the amount of money that is being budgeted. Again, budget of a nation or budget of a state or budgeting is not something that people just do haphazardly. Budgeting, as I say, is an art. People need to learn it. People need to apply it in the interest of the nation. And then those who prepare budget for the nation, and the person on whose table lies the bulk of the implementation of a budget, supposed to know the nitty-gritty of the budget that they want to present. It is at this point, and it's because of this vacuum or lacuna that we are having crisis of budgeting in Nigeria. And many offices or many agencies of government are supposed to play a role in the budgeting process, don't usually play that role. Even if they play the role, it's just fulfillment of rituals or ritualism. And this is a big problem, because if you go to America, for instance, several states in America, their budget is more than the budget of 10 states in Africa, including Nigeria. So when we are talking about South Africa, Kenya, you see that people of South Africa, they engage their president. If the president goes to present budget at the South African parliament, for instance, you will see the likes of Julius Malema and other persons try to critique the budget while the president is still there after presentation. But in Nigeria, is it the same thing? A president will just present a budget, what you hear intermittent applause. After that, they will say, they will just make statement. As a speaker will make a statement, the state president will make a statement that we are going to look at the budget, we are going to work with you, blah, blah, blah. Nobody will critically look at the budget. And that's a document that's supposed to be with them some weeks before the day that the president is coming to present it.
Okay.
So we are, let me just say that we are not there yet.
Yeah, we are lagging behind.
Because that's the square pegs are not usually put in
Thank you. That forms the reason for this discussion, because we're in the last months of the year, and basically it's expected that the National Assembly, State Houses of Assembly will be expecting appropriation bills coming from the executive. You are a political economist. Now, we look at this, what he just said as regards poor planning and leading to poor implementation, and thereabout having a deficit budget. But the challenge of having a deficit budget is quite excruciating. Should we always have a deficit budget? And what do you see as regards our budget? Do they meet the goals of wealth creation?
Well, thank you very much. The first thing is, like Dr. Nevi has already pointed out, there are three categories of budgets. You have the surplus, the balance, and of course the deficit. All of them have their merits and demerits. With proper planning and effective resource management, you're going to have a surplus budget. But if there's, a budget has three elements. There's the people element, there's the data element, and there's the process element with the budgeting itself. So with proper planning, you can maximize available resources. So in such a way that you have a balanced budget. You are spending exactly what you are earning. The projection matches, the expenditure. The projection of income matches the expenditure in the course of the year.
But we don't always practice that, do we?
Yeah, which is the question you have asked about deficit budgeting. Because why I said earlier that all of them have their merits is because sometimes you might need to invest in critical infrastructure, which can be told to earn money. And some of those funds for which you are, to even allow for a takeoff, to even allow for the economy to revamp or to grow, you might have to outspend whatever you are earning. So that's sometimes people engage in deficit budgeting. But critically, if you're not, even on that point that you are pointing out, it's the issue of the budgeting process, the planning process, the execution process. It's as if what we are doing in some of these countries, in some of these states, including Nigeria, is the factor around, procurement-driven budgeting, or, just heads, subheads. Okay, what we have for your ministry is 20 million. How do you want to spend it? It is not what does your ministry need, what value does it need to deliver to society.
So they are not critical about it.
They are not following, they are just haphazard, not critical, if I want to use the word, not following the due process of budgeting. And that's why we have, it's not a crime to have deficit budgeting. It is the fact that it is a lack of our critical planning that is leading to the deficit budget. That's where the issue is.
And lack of research.
Yes, lack of critical planning. We're not only doing the groundwork. Let's say, for example, in Nigeria, how many people, where do the people come in our budgeting process? The critical element in the budgeting process is the people. I said people, data, and process. Which Nigerians are consulted in drawing up a budget? None. It is just an incremental kind. Okay, last year we spent, our budget was 27 trillion. This year, we can push it to 30 trillion naira. So, okay, this 3 trillion, where do we fix it? Okay, works. We'll increase your own by 100 billion. What can you do with it? Haphazard.
Pedestrian.
Very poor. It's not, what we're actually doing is not budgeting. We just funds allocation. And that is why you are seeing that the economy is not great. I'm not one of those who is big on comparative analysis of budgeting or budget sizes. Because it's not about the size. It's about the impact.
The impact.
It's about the people. It's about the data that is driving that process. That is but we will now sit back and look. For example, what is the value of Nigerian budget in dollars as the total Nigerian budget, the federal and states combined, as compared to South Africa, for example? A few years ago, Nigeria was the largest economy in Africa. But today, we are fourth. Countries like South Africa, like even Egypt, Morocco, Kenya, they are even doing better than Nigeria when it comes to the value, the GDP, our GDP, the size of their economy. Nigeria, which houses 1/5, 1/5 of total population in Africa, one country, a fifth of the entire 54 African countries. In terms of budget, size of its budget, as comparatively, it is way down. So it shows that we're not doing a good job. Even that budget challenge, that budget figure that we are seeing comparatively, is also an indicator of the poor budgeting process and a poor management of the economy generally, and the poor budgeting process. That's what it's indicative of. So I feel that the Nigerian states, either at the central or subnational level, need to do a critical review. It's not as if we don't have the human resource. It's just that somehow we don't put our best foot forward. The kind of people who have led this country, either at the central or subnational level, are not those who understand these core issues of governance, these core issues of budgeting, this core issue of economic development.
Okay.
Because unless we are able to put, to borrow your words, the round pegs in round holes, we are not going to have a situation whereby our budget will work for the people, will grow our economy, and then, our GDP, of course, will improve.
Okay.
We're not going to have that.
Okay, let's look at the key drivers of wealth creation, which is not far-fetched from having the resources, natural resources that a country has in terms of the oil, gas, and mineral resources. Nigeria is a blessed country when it comes to such resources. And again, let's look at another key driving factor in human capital development. How often do we do this in terms of developing human capacity in Nigeria, Neville? And of course, looking at our overdependence on oil revenues. How do we reject the process for a different narrative?
First and foremost, when we are talking about wealth creation, we are talking about the avenues that are available for a nation state, because what we are discussing is in relation to a nation state, to be able to raise revenue, not only raise revenue, apply that revenue, and then the revenue will further generate more revenue for that state on a sustainable basis. In that case, you say that there is wealth creation. In Nigeria here, and over time, excuse me, there is no, and when you are talking about wealth creation, a nation state that want to create wealth has to be deliberate about it. But over time in this country, we have not seen a deliberate policy of government aimed at creating wealth. Wealth that can still be applied, and then that wealth will continue to generate more wealth for the populace.
It's because we continue to follow the status quo.
Yes, on
without making a difference.
Basis. As I said earlier, and I also aligning myself with the reasoning of my co-discussant. Everything that we have done in this country is usually haphazard steps that portray Nigeria as a giant.
How do we move away from that?
When we look inward, we discover that the processes that we are supposed to follow, we are not following them. And the reason is because there's what we call state capacity. The state, the Nigerian state, is supposed to have a capacity to create wealth. For instance, let's talk about mineral resources. We have crude oil in Nigeria and several other oil sector related resources that can create wealth for Nigeria. For instance, for the past 20 years plus now, refineries in Nigeria are not working. Now,
but we hear that the Port Harcourt refinery has commenced
we hear
the process.
We don't need to hear. We need to feed the impact.
But what's the capacity? That's the basic challenge.
Now, over time, we see that Nigerians who are supposed to, because when we are talking about wealth creation, it is not people from space that will create wealth for a nation. It is the citizens of that state and the leadership of that state that will create wealth. Now, if we look at the oil sector as a case study, as we have been saying, you discover that over time, the number one wealth creation agency of government in that sector, which is the NNPC, is shrouded in mystery. And at every point in time when searchlights are beamed on NNPC, you will see that NNPC is like an agency of government that is corruption personified. Okay,
corruption as a negative factor affecting it.
Yes. Now, the money that is even generated is under-disclosed. If you go by the analysis of the Emir of Kano, Sanusi, Lamido Sanusi, as he then was when he was governor of Central Bank, he accused openly and at several fora the NNPC of collecting revenue from oil companies, helping Nigeria to sell oil, and the money was not remitted of about 40-something billion US dollars.
We would have helped to cure the deficit budget of the country.
That money would have been applied to the economy for further wealth creation. Now, that is that.
I guess the anti-graft agency is focusing their attention on that.
We hear of banditry in places like Zamfara State, in places like Nasarawa State and other places in the north where you also have mineral resources. Now, if you go and trace the origin of banditry in these places, you will discover that it is as a result of attempt by external forces to tap the resources without helping first and foremost to deliver on corporate social responsibility to the community, and then helping to create wealth both in that environment and for the nation and the state where the resource is located. Now, what follows that the citizens, the indigenes, are pitched against the people who are tapping the resource. How do you create wealth in that environment? If you create wealth at all, it's going to be wealth in the pocket of the few, and those powerful people who have come either with a connivance with foreigners who are tapping the resource to further de-empower the state in terms of wealth creation.
Okay.
There are several aspects of this issue of wealth creation that
we'll come back
discuss. Let me just end by saying that what the state, and when I say the state, states of the federation and the federal government should be doing, or what they should do, is to establish what they call revenue commission, as distinct from inland revenue, inland revenue service. We have federal inland revenue service, then we have state inland revenue service or services. Now, apart from this, we're supposed to have what we call revenue commission, where all the opportunities of wealth creation and application of the wealth that is so derived can be managed in the interest of that.
But will that not be bringing double standard? Because we already have a ministry focusing on that, like budget and national planning.
No, budget and national planning office is not in charge of wealth creation.
Okay.
It's just like an office where issues of budgeting are related to the federal government.
Okay, but we have but we have such a ministry here in the state.
Ministry of what?
Wealth creation, of course.
You have such a ministry in this state.
Well, that was in the past administration, anyways. We had a commissioner for wealth creation, but that was in the past administration. But we're going to see how that will be panning out. But we'll take a short break, after which we extend the discussion further, where Ibrahim Boma will be having a host on that.
TMI, every opinion counts.
In a period where the federal government and, of course, state governments are about churning out the fiscal appropriation bills, which could be passed into law finally after overhauling the process. Here comes the crux for this discussion, where we're looking at budgeting and wealth creation. And joining us via audio is the chairman of the National Economic Society, Edo State Chapter, Dr. Francis Igberaise. Good morning, Dr. Francis.
Good morning.
All right, Dr. Francis, we've been having a challenge about budgeting and wealth creation in Nigeria. What's your perception on the measure of our budgeting process and how it meets the aspect of wealth creation in the country and, of course, at the state level?
Well, I will just start by saying that straight and point blank, by saying that we got it all wrong. Maybe because of what we inherited from the military. However, we also see that we are even now worse than the era of the military. For example, all the principles of budgeting have been neglected both at the subnational and national level. When compared in similar standing with Nigeria, namely, say South Africa, within Africa, South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, which are the top four, including Nigeria. So that is where we are. We have not been able to correct this over time. And therefore, budget becomes merely a ritual. For instance, a budget is supposed to focus a transfer of income from the high segment of the society to the low segment of the society. So those policies, those programs are supposed to be inbuilt in budget. But what we have done, and then we generate the income that are not really going to be crowding out. And that one makes a country to develop. The countries that have developed, that's what makes it. And it is supposed to be easy for us because we are supposed to easily trace the development pattern of the already developed countries. No, but we are not doing that. For instance, look at the level of debt service of the Nigeria budget. How are you going to create wealth? Go to other countries like South Africa. Where the budget of South Africa, for example, is 100 with a population far less than that of Nigeria. Nigeria's population is 3 times bigger than that of South Africa. Why the budget of South Africa is $132 billion. That of Nigeria is about $33 billion. Yet, the debt servicing of Nigeria, the debt servicing of Nigeria to the budget of Nigeria is about 68.8%, while that of South Africa is only about 16%. You get what I am saying?
Yeah.
That will tell you that we are not moving anywhere. We are not heading anywhere. We cannot raise our head above the water. Look at, but there is there appear to me to be something that is going to be corrected. I was talking with somebody about VAT. If those are imputed in the budget, maybe over time, it's one policy I support about this regime. You go and see some states that are contributing about 200 and something million to the VAT, and what they are collecting is about 5 billion from VAT. Whereas states that are collecting about 200 and something billion will collect about 40 billion from VAT. Those are not leading to wealth creation. But when you go to the subnationals, like the states, there are many things you should also do, because the budgeting process of the state is a little different from that of the national. Number one is smaller, and number two, the principles are different, because there is no revenue sharing formula that will bring money. Especially in the case of Nigeria, the kind of federalism we practice, you rely on federal allocation, and the principle of giving this money is equality, derivation, and all that. We carry different percentage. So it is what you get, you are relying on. And some of the states are not viable enough to generate income apart from taxing the SMEs and then reducing unemployment. And that's why you hear some states will be posting of internally generated revenue. Internally generated revenue for note. Internally generated revenue at the expense of the citizens' welfare. So what we have seen are businessmen in power who are ruthless profiteers instead of having governance who are carefully and cautiously directing effort towards welfareism. Because the primary purpose of government is welfare. And therefore, the principle still hold that the new world economic order must be domesticated in the states, just as the national. That is where the similarity is. You are going to now say, okay, what are those things the high income people consume? Let me tax them and exempt those things which the low income people consume. And then you make such policy. In other words, you must be knowledgeable, highly knowledgeable to set targets and make policy. Because what people do not know, ideas are not policy. And all this reflects in budget. You are talking about wealth creation now with a budget. If you take idea that is supposed to be raw material to be policy without cooking, you are not going to lead to wealth creation. What we have mistaken as a government as wealth creation over time is the amount of revenue we are able to generate on the short run. Whereas if you do the right thing, on the long run, you are going to generate much more revenue than you are in a hurry to generate on the short run and unnecessarily taxing the citizen. And you call wealth creation, and you are boasting about your IGR. IGR that are credited out businesses, IGR that are credited out employment, IGR that are credited out economic growth. As a matter of fact, the sub-national government, like the state, I have never seen one that has set a target of their growth policy, that has set a target of employment policy, that has set a target of inflation policy. None.
Okay.
They just do it by the rule of thumb.
Thank you.
And I attribute this to one. Please let me finish. I attribute it to one thing: the fact that they don't even have economists in their government. What they have are businessmen who are pretending to be economists. If you are not an economist, I have said it time and over again, you can never know it. No matter how you are successful in business, anybody that comes to government now has seen himself as an economist, as a data economist, because by government, you do not know principle, you do not know model, and you say you are budgeting, you say you are doing economic analysis. How? It's like taking a patient to a doctor, you are putting an economist there to the theater room, the doctor are not there. And you form economist team, there are no economists, you put businessmen there, they will do what favor businessman, the businessman, not what favor the citizen. This is where we have seen ourselves.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. Dr. Francis is the chairman, Edo State chapter of the National Economic Council of Nigeria. And looking at what he said, shed light on the issues surrounding how to create wealth. But that brings our mind to tax reforms, for instance. The conversation that is ongoing right now, and even the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, and the person of Oyedele, made an exposition of the budget of Nigeria and how small it is, and of course offered ways out of it in order to rejig our tax reforms. But surprisingly, if I got the chairman of the Edo State chapter of National Economic Council rightly, if I got him rightly, do you see tax reforms as a way out of creating wealth and, of course, increasing the revenue of the nation state?
Okay, well,
yes, I alluded to that.
Yeah. I'll come back to you, but that question is for Ibrahim. I'll come back to you, Dr. Francis.
Okay.
Well, the first thing to note is that when it comes to income, national income, there have to be several streams. It's not one single line. Of course, the critical element when it comes to income generation for a state has to do with taxation.
Okay.
But first of all, when it comes to taxation, Nigerians are not doing well. If you look at the tax net, it's about just under 20% of those who should be paying tax are actually paying tax in Nigeria. So rather than increasing the tax burden on the few, mostly civil servants, because it's pay as you win, as from source they are deducting. But the actual earners, the big earners, those who are really earning the money in Nigeria, they don't pay tax because they also control the levels of government. So the first tax, yes, is a veritable way of income generation for any state. And so tax reforms that expands the tax net, that also targets the bourgeoisie, the elite, the rich, the very rich in society, those who actually own the resources, those who are controlling NNPC Limited, for example, those in the organized private sector. If the tax net actually does capture those ones, it expands to capture those ones, yes. But that is not the only source of revenue generation. Okay. That's the first thing. I'll talk about other sources of revenue generation shortly. But added to that is the fact that it starts with the data. It starts with the planning. If you want to improve on wealth creation, if you want to increase revenue generation, it starts with data and planning. Nigeria is very short. Nigeria is very weak. Nigeria is very poor when it comes to data generation, and even putting, when you set up models, when you set up, theories on which you analyze, okay, how do we get from point A to point? If you already have a targeted point, end point, how do we move from where we are to where we want to be? Our people are not doing so much when it comes to critical thinking, when it comes to planning, when it comes to generating the appropriate data, even as basic as a voter register, there are issues. As basic as national population census, there are issues. A country that cannot seriously do those very basics, how do you plan? When you don't have the right data, how many people, for example, live in Edo State? Who knows? How many people, how many children were born over the last 1 year in Edo State? Who knows? I'm not talking about Nigeria. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The data is not there. On the basis of what there for? Okay. I think that we're even going to plan. So I'm saying that First of all, yes, tax.
Yes.
It works. But it is not, Nigeria is a resource-rich economy, society, when it comes to mineral resources. Nigeria has oil. Our oil, till date, is not being metered. Nigeria cannot say for certain how much oil it is extracting from, crude oil it is extracting. Nigeria does not know. It is what the multinational oil companies tell us. That's what we deal with.
Okay.
And then, if you just allow me pivot, and then if you go to the north, like, of course, the Navy has also pointed out, we have so much mineral resources there, including gold. Gold is more valuable than even oil. Nigeria has a huge resource of deposit of gold.
Yeah, mineral resources.
Yes. How are we exploiting? How are we exploring? How are we generating revenue? How are we even able to benefit as a state, a nation state, from the mineral deposits all over the country?
Thank you. Thank you. You raised a very vital point. I'll come back to you. But again, let me borrow off Neville Obagedo's time. Let me give it to Dr. Francis Igberise. You made a reaction, but I cut in immediately. I want you to finish on that, because you seem to suggest that tax reforms, the way it's been done in Nigeria, is not the way out of creating wealth.
Now, the one that is currently being done, I am in support of it, because the tax reform being talked about in Nigeria now, among others, is the issue of VAT. The issue of VAT, that is why you see some states, particularly around the north, are not supporting it. Because VAT, it is being generated by one side of the country more than the other. But the derivation principle is less in terms of sharing this money. That is, derivation is 20%, while equality of state is 50%. So the 50%, now when you are talking of equality of state, you are in other words also talking of even development as a criteria for sharing this money. For instance, if I generate 1 billion naira from, I mean, if I generate one, I'm just giving an example.
Okay, Dr. Francis, I'll come back to you immediately after this short break. Do stay, Dr. Francis. I'll come back to you. We take a short break.
TMI, every opinion counts.
Well, we're still on budgeting and wealth creation, looking at the Nigerian perspective. We still have Dr. Francis Igberise, the Edo State Chapter Chairman of Nigeria Economic Society. Continue from where you left off, Dr. Francis.
Okay, I was now saying, for example, if Edo State generates 1 billion naira from VAT, if you follow, which is 50%, Edo State is no longer going to get even up to 500 million from what they generate, because there will be some other states who are not generating even up to 200 million. Those states will not get over close to even more than what Edo State is generating, or close to what Edo State is generating. So the tax reform will, as a matter of fact, correct that. If you have a state like Zamfara and Imo that are not generating up to 300 million naira in VAT, but they are collecting about 5 billion naira. Whereas you have a state like Lagos that is generating over 200 billion naira, they are collecting just about 40 billion naira. Just because there has to be equality of states or even development.
Okay.
So that I support. The other parts which they are talking about, if you have a firm that is not having a return of 50 million naira, that firm should be exempted from tax.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Why the
Francis.
ones that are having more than that should pay
Thank you, Dr. Francis. Thank you for taking out your time to be part of this discussion. I take that as your final remarks on this discussion. Well, let's take our final remarks. Over to you,
Thank you.
Neville Obasado.
What I just wanted to, this is my final remarks.
Okay,
This is my
go ahead.
final remark. This is what many countries have done. If you look at a country like Algeria, a country like Egypt, that are in the same standing of Nigeria, this is what they have done. That their budget is robust. It's not just oil. Their budget is robust, and the debt servicing to the budget is very, very small. Because with 68% of debt servicing in the case of Nigeria, we are heading nowhere. And that is also what is happening around the state. Let them bring in economists to advise them. Even free of charge, we are ready to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. Thank you for your contribution in this. Dr. Francis made a mention of accidental economists that have been seen in government. But we've always depended on the oil revenues, and of course, there's need for diversification. And some have said raising an agrarian society where the agricultural sector is key is pivotal if we are to create wealth beyond where we are now. In your closing remarks, how do you wrap up on this, Neville?
You see, what I would say, because time is of the essence, is that we are not ready for wealth creation. And I align myself with the reasoning of Dr. Gbera said just now about how we are not creating wealth and the principles of wealth creation that we are supposed to follow that we are not following.
Yeah.
In any case, wealth creation is a phenomenon that is supposed to be deliberate and characterized with planning, effective planning. It is that planning that when we effectively plan, we can be talking of outcomes and gains in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Then, wealth creation also have to do with deliberate organizing. Then, budgeting itself is supposed to be part of it. Now, excuse me. Then it has to do with all the issues of tax cut, generating internally generated revenue, and the rest of them that have to be effectively managed. We can also use borrowing, for instance. Borrowing that is transparently administered and deployed to areas that can, over time and on a sustainable basis, help us to create wealth.
Yeah.
And we can also create wealth when we don't have power. We don't have power supply. There are business ventures that people are supposed to go into that can help them to create wealth at SME level and even at subnational levels like local government level, local government area level, and state level. All of these are like hanging in the sky like a balloon because there's no deliberate policy of government that is aimed at wealth creation at the federal level that's supposed to trickle down to the subnational level. So if we must go back to our position in Africa as a leading economy to sideline South Africa, Rwanda, Egypt, and other countries, we now need to look inward. And that is where the issue of expertise. People cannot appropriate and arrogate to themselves the knowledge that they don't have because they are opportune to be in the corridors of power. I still used to remember that when Obama was president of America, I started to be corrected, he had 99 advisors on various aspects of the American society and American relationship with the outside world. So these people will bring their expert knowledge, which himself and his cabinet will process. So when you hear that this is the policy of Obama's administration, people will be applauding him. They say the man is doing the right thing. Not knowing that there are people behind the scene who are experts in that area that are working for him. Okay. So this is what should be applicable to our state, Edo State, other state, and then the federal.
Let's give some time on this conversation, and I'll be extending this to you, Ibrahim Momo. Let's look at the need to have a quick fix it, because we have it here where Nigeria's, debt is rising daily. We have about 121 trillion naira. If we are to convert that to dollars, it's about $91.6 billion that Nigeria is owing. Now, What's the quick fix it? Because we have the 2025 budget coming. The deficit we had in 2024 is Herculean. We don't know what 2025 budget is coming with.
Well, I'm not one who is against borrowing. On a general note, what I'm against is poor borrowing plans, poor use of borrowed money, and then untargeted borrowings. For example, you borrow for infrastructure, and those infrastructure, they make life easier for people, and you toll it. It's a wonderful kind of borrowing. But Nigerian system of borrowing is borrowing to loot, borrowing to spend on
frivolities,
flamboyance. Nigeria borrow to buy a presidential jet. Nigerians borrow to engage in foreign trips, tours. You borrow money that you don't need.
But don't forget the foreign tours is to bring in FDI.
No, the data is the issue. What level, over the years, for example, the level of foreign direct investment has been on a downward slide. So the idea that is to bring it, if it was meant to bring, has it brought? That's the question. So it has to be data driven. What is the outcome of the borrowings? Has Nigeria's economies left the third world, the less developed, to a second world, newly industrializing economy? Or has it become developed? Has it come to the first world economy?
And now that we've even dropped from being the giant of Africa in terms of our economy.
We are not more even the largest economy in Africa now. We are now the fourth.
The fourth.
South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, before Nigeria.
So what's the quick fix it, like I said?
So the first issue is that Nigeria must borrow for productivity. Nigeria must borrow for capital projects.
Are you not worried about the fact that even at present, servicing our debt is like using a quarter of the national budget for the year? Are you not concerned about that? So if we are to continue on that spree?
No, the issue is not, if you look at the biggest economies in the world are the biggest debtors. The debt to GDP ratio of the US is about 89%. The debt to GDP ratio of Japan is about 125%.
But they are utilizing it for economic growth.
That is the point. It's not an issue of borrowing.
Okay.
What are we borrowing for? To what end are we putting those debts? That is the question we need to ask ourselves. And I find out that Nigeria, over time, whether at the central or social level, has been very poor in terms of the management or the application of those loans that they have borrowed. And I think Nigeria needs to watch it. We shouldn't borrow because, look at the annual budget that we pass.
All right.
Nigeria's budget, just last point. We borrow to fund our budget, but we end up meeting the recorded expenditure and failing only about 10 to 20% of the capital expenditure of the budget, element of the budget that is met. Okay. So you mean you are borrowing just to spend, not to develop.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim Momo. A big thanks to you, Dr. Francis Igberese. Are you still with me?
I wanted to just correct an impression.
Okay, do that in 30 seconds.
Yeah, somebody there made comparison with our debt ratio of 68% and that of Japan of 170%. That was the point exactly I made. You see, Japan and Nigeria, they are not in the same matrix. In the global development matrix, they don't have the same destiny.
Okay.
Whether artificial or natural.
Thank you. We will see how we're going to make sure we have this conversation in a subsequent episode on this program, TMI. Big thanks, Dr. Francis, always the Edo State chairman of the Nigeria Economic Council Society. And big thanks to you, Nebilo Bakedo, political scientist, lecturer, University of Benin, and Ibrahim Momo, lecturer, Ambrose University, Ekpoma. Big thanks, and do have a beautiful day ahead of you.